Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our live coverage of the latest mission from Vandenberg Space Force Base. I'm Will Robinson Smith. Will be conducting our commentary for the duration of this coverage. We are broadcasting, as we always do, from the Spaceflight Now News Bureau here at NASA's Kennedy Space Center. Hope you're all having a wonderful start to the weekend, getting in plenty of rest and relaxation for those fortunate enough to be off work today. And we're glad you're stopping by for coverage of the latest Falcon 9 mission to take off from the West Coast. As we're getting things rolling on this live stream, if you haven't already, certainly appreciate it if you could do us a big favor. Click that like button, share the stream. Allows more folks to find their way into this live launch coverage as we're now less than 30 minutes away from the launch of a Falcon 9 rocket. On board 22 Starlink satellites heading up to low Earth orbit, targeting a T0 of what you see here on your screen, 3:02 p.m. Pacific, 6:02 p.m. Eastern, 23:02 UTC for our friends joining around the world. Want to thank in the live chat our moderators helping to support the coverage today. So thanks to Clistia Lee, and welcome to a couple of our newest moderators joining us now. Jeff Hansen, Rick Donner, channel members of ours, now helping us out as moderators as well. So really appreciate the two of you hopping aboard with us. And a big thanks broadly to the rest of our moderator crew whenever y'all are able to step in and help us out. Of course, our live coverage is made possible by the channel member community here on YouTube. So thanks to wonderful folks like the Rocket Girl, Butterfly, Cumulus Granatus, Meg McElroy, Lone Salafalist, Himmelbred 2.0, Rocket Lady Elizabeth, and many others. Channel membership comes with a number of perks, including discounts at our online shop, that is shop.spaceflightnow.com. Access to our member-only videos here on YouTube, access to our members-only Discord server, and of course the ability to watch all of our live launch lift-off moments from here at the Cape in 4K. Want to give a brief shout to Rocket Lady Elizabeth for catching me at SpaceCom this year. It was a great expo hosted by the wonderful folks there in Orlando, Florida. Great year to kick off the year in space, and always good to meet folks from our community out and about in the real world. Speaking of our newest moderator, Rick Donner, gifting 10 Spaceflight Now memberships. Really appreciate that, Rick, getting us off to a good footing. And also want to welcome in Sean Sinziger, joining us with channel membership at the Mission Specialist level. So to our 11 newest channel members, welcome aboard. We're glad to have you all with us. And to the 10 who are gifted membership, be sure to thank Rick in the live chat if you haven't already. Last little bit of housekeeping. If you have a comment or question about this mission or other goings-on in the realm of space and spaceflight, go ahead and use last little bit of housekeeping. If you have a comment or question, again, you can use the YouTube Super Chat feature, and not only will we be giving you some interesting things to talk about as we cruise on through the countdown, but you'll be supporting what we do here at Spaceflight Now, and that is also greatly appreciated. Thanks to Rocket Lady Elizabeth and Jeff Hansen for each gifting 5 Spaceflight Now memberships. Appreciate that from the both of you. And to our 10 now newest channel members, welcome to each of you. Be sure to thank Jeff and Elizabeth in the live chat if you haven't already. Weather in California, as reported by the Los Angeles Times, It's to be kind of rainy up in the north to central California areas as reportedly 3 atmospheric river storms are heading towards the Golden State. I want to take a quick look at the satellite view from the GOES West satellite. You can tell there's quite a bit of cloud over the area of northern to central California. Fortunately, though, it looks like, broadly speaking, Vandenberg isn't too sucked in, although there are some low clouds that are beginning to push their way into that area. Ironically, as it just so happens, this is, while not our trajectory map, a sort of by happenstance nice illustration of the trajectory of the Falcon 9 rocket today. Essentially, you can draw a straight line from where the clouds just begin to touch the coast of the California coastline where Vandenberg is, and basically go right along that cloud shelf, and that is essentially the path of the Falcon 9 as it lifts off from Space Launch Complex 4 East. I'll show you the proper trajectory map in just a little bit, but just interesting coincidence that got nature showing us the path of the Falcon 9. Time now T-minus 22 minutes, 38 seconds and counting. As mentioned at the top of the broadcast, SpaceX is currently underway with fueling its Falcon 9 rocket. So let's go ahead and step through the countdown timeline, let you know the mission milestones that have passed at this point and what we still have ahead of us as SpaceX is working towards the launch of its Falcon 9 coming up here in just a little more than 22 minutes. Call on the start of prop load happened at about the T-minus 38 minute mark. Fueling began at T-minus 35 minutes with the loading of RP-1, or a rocket-grade kerosene, on board the Falcon 9's first and second stages. At the same time, liquid oxygen began flowing on board the Falcon 9's first stage. T-minus 30 minutes, they began loading cryogenic helium into the pressure vessels on the first stage. Helium is important because it's used to pressurize the main propellant tanks during flight. Same happens on the second stage about 5 minutes thereafter. T-minus 23 minutes is when second stage RP-1 load wraps up. Then T-minus 20 minutes and 50 seconds is when the process gets underway. That's when SpaceX is thermally conditioning the feed lines prior to second stage LOX load. We see that visually manifest as the so-called big vent here with our Cape-based launches. That'll wrap up about 30 seconds prior to second stage LOX load, which begins at T-minus 16 minutes. It's the next big milestone out ahead of us after, of course, that chill-down process concludes. Moving right along, T-minus 7 minutes is when the engine chill-down gets underway. That's when SpaceX flows a small amount of liquid oxygen through the plumbing and turbo pumps, hoping to protect the engines from the risk of thermal shock and damage during the startup sequence. About 6 minutes before liftoff, the first stage kerosene tank is full. Then at T-minus 4.5 minutes, they'll begin pressurizing for the strong back retract sequence. You start to see the results of that when the clamp arms just beneath the payload fairings open up, and then the transporter erector, with a strong back, reclines about 13 degrees away from the Falcon 9 rocket here at Vandenberg. It stays in that position until liftoff. At that point, I'll pull back in a much more rapid fashion to clear the way for the vertical climb of the Falcon 9. 3 minutes before launch, the first stage LOX tank is full. Same is true on the second stage, about a minute after that, at which point the Falcon 9 is fully loaded with 1 million pounds of propellant. In the final 60 seconds, as we hear the call that the Falcon 9 is in startup, Control of the countdown is handed over from the ground sequencer to the Falcon 9's onboard flight computers, and the propellant tanks are brought up to flight pressure. SpaceX launch director will give their go for launch at T-minus 45 seconds. The engine ignition command is issued at T-minus 3 seconds. And if all 9 Merlin engines are healthy and ignite, the command will be given for the hold down clamps to release the Falcon 9 for a T0 liftoff, coming up at 3:02 p.m. Pacific, 6:02 p.m. Eastern, 23:02 UTC. We're in T-minus 19 minutes and 13 seconds. Now T-minus 18 minutes, 18 seconds and counting. As the big vent is happening as we speak, let's go ahead and give you the outlook of the flight path of the Falcon 9 rocket. Had sort of the coincidental trajectory thanks to the GOES West satellite, but let's take a look at the real deal and talk a little bit about trajectory, shall we? After lifting off from Space Launch Complex 4 East there at Vandenberg, Falcon 9 will be flying in a southeasterly trajectory going along the coasts of California and Mexico, with a touchdown happening on the SpaceX drone ship called, of course, I Still Love You. If successful, this landing will mark the 119th booster landing for that particular drone ship and the 403rd booster landing to date. Today's launch is the 5th orbital flight from Vandenberg of the year so far. This also happens to be the 200th orbital launch from this particular launch complex. Of the 200 missions after this one that will have elapsed, 111 of those will come from SpaceX. Falcon 9 first stage booster being used on this mission, B-1075, will be attempting its 17th liftoff and landing. SpaceX is working to certify its first stage boosters for up to 40 flights apiece. Additionally, they are also working to certify their fairing halves for the same number of missions. And so they'll be attempting to recover those fairing halves after they splash down in the waters of the Pacific Ocean under the support of steerable parachutes. SpaceX saves about $6 million per recovery effort, so it's an important part of their business model to retrieve these fairing halves, refurbish them, and turn them around for future flights as often as possible. They'll use one of their recovery vessels to scoop them up out of the water, bring them back into port, and turn them around for a future flight. And at 16 minutes, second stage LOX load is now getting underway on the Falcon 9 rocket. Time now T minus 14 minutes, 13 seconds and counting. I want to thank one of our channel members, Grandpa Jim Pondu, for being with us for now 7 months at the power leader level. Appreciate your ongoing support. Let's go ahead and talk about the payload on board this particular Falcon 9 rocket. 22 Starlink satellites in total. This is an image from a previous Falcon flight, but gives you an idea of what the stack of them looked like prior to liftoff, an encapsulation course. As of last year, SpaceX says that it began introducing what they call a Starlink V2 Mini optimized version of the satellite. We've had one mission so far this year where they launched 27, presumably of those satellites, of the optimized version of the Starlink V2 Minis. Unclear if or how many have launched since then or before then, but those new optimized satellites weigh about 1,267 pounds or 575 kilograms as compared to the older version of the V2 Minis, which clocking at about 1,760 pounds or about 800 kilograms. Both have a wingspan of about 100 feet or 30 meters. They use Argon Hall thrusters for in-orbit maneuvering. They're built in Redmond, Washington, which is near Seattle. They'll be deployed today at about 183 miles or 295 kilometers in altitude at a 53 degrees inclination. For an idea of what these satellites look like on orbit, this image was captured by Black Sky and HEO last year. This is an actual V2 Mini in its on-orbit configuration. Here's an artist rendering, though, of a V2 Mini, or a series of V2 Minis, and their laser link mesh that connect them. Now T minus 11 minutes, 44 seconds and counting. I want to thank Rick St. Hilaire for a $5 super chat. Appreciate that, Rick. As mentioned, the Falcon 9 first stage booster supporting today's mission, going for its 17th flight so far. Before it notches that milestone, let's go ahead and talk about its previous missions as it gets ready to add one more to that. First up for this booster, a Starlink flight. All of its missions happen to be from over on the West Coast. First lifted off on January 19th of 2023. Next up was a mission for the U.S. Space Force's Space Development Agency, launching a batch of satellites for the Tranche 0 mission. Then a series of a handful of Starlink satellites. Starlink 2-9 on May 10th, 5-7 on June 22nd, 6-20 on August 8th, 7-3 on September 25th, 7-6 on October 29th. Moving on, we had the launch of the SARA 2-3 satellites. These are for Germany's reconnaissance satellite system, part of a trio of satellites that were launched in total, all of them by SpaceX. Back to Starlink land we go for a few missions here. We had Starlink 7-12 on January 29th, Starlink 7-16 on March 19th, Starlink 9-2 on June 24th. That was followed up by a rideshare mission, the Transporter 11 flight, lifting off on August 16th of last year. And then we're back to Starlink land, bringing us up to the present day. Starlink 9-17 on September 20th, Starlink 9-9 on October 30th, 9-13 on November 24th, and Starlink 11-4. A little bit of a typo there. Starlink 11-3 actually on the 29th. Starlink 11-4, of course, coming up here in 9 minutes. Time now T-minus 7 minutes, 55 seconds and counting. I want to thank Red Sky for a $2 super chat. Appreciate you, Red Sky. Just excited to be part of this team. Speaking of part of this team, thanks to the now 6,700 plus of you who are watching with us live. If you haven't already, be sure to click that like button for us. Do us a big favor. Allows more folks to find their way to this live stream. It's now just 7.5 minutes before the planned liftoff of this Falcon 9 rocket from Vandenberg Space Force Base. As we're cruising toward the 7-minute mark, we're coming up on the point in which SpaceX will start to chill the 9 Merlin engines at the base of the Falcon 9 first stage booster. Also want to thank moderator Clistia Lee for gifting 5 Spaceflight Now memberships. Appreciate that generosity, Clistia. And to our 5 newest channel members, welcome aboard. We're glad to have you all with us. Be sure to thank Clistia in live chat if you haven't already. And we hope you decide to stick around with channel membership. As we approach the final 6 minutes of the count, let's go ahead and take a moment to talk about the launch timeline, a sequence of nominal events that we're looking for following a good liftoff of the Falcon 9 rocket from California. Following that teaser liftoff at 3:02 p.m. local time, Falcon 9 rocket will pass through max Q with a point of greatest aerodynamic pressure on the vehicle a little more than a minute after liftoff. There will then be a sequence of 3 events in fairly rapid succession. We'll see first stage main engine cutoff, or MECO, at about T plus 2 minutes and 23 seconds. That'll be followed by stage separation a few seconds after that, and then second stage engine ignition. The Merlin vacuum engine on the second stage comes to life. The payload fairings will be jettisoned just before the 3-minute mark. And a few minutes after that, the first stage entry burn will begin. 3 of the Merlin engines on the booster will reignite for a roughly 28-second burn, beginning to slow the vehicle down. Preparation for the landing burn coming up at T plus 7 minutes and 50 seconds. A touchdown on the drone ship, Of Course I Still Love You, is expected about T plus 8 minutes and 16 seconds. The Merlin vacuum engine will conclude its first burn about 15-ish seconds after that. At which point, the upper stage of the Falcon 9 rocket will enter into a coast phase until T plus 54 minutes, 9 seconds. There will be a brief 2-second burn to circularize the orbit. And the Starlink satellites will be deployed at T plus 1 hour, 1 minute, and 3 seconds. And as you just heard, we do have mission audio coming in and views of the Falcon 9 rocket, albeit, as you can see, surrounding the pad, not the clearest conditions, but also it's a low cloud shelf, so not quite fog, so we can actually see some of the structures there around the pad, but with this angle, yeah, it does look pretty socked in actually from this particular vantage point. And it looks like the fog is kind of rolling in. So maybe not the most picturesque for those in the immediate vicinity of Vandenberg, but hopefully those watching in the greater Los Angeles area and further south of the rocket, it'll be a little bit better viewing. Unfortunately, with the clouds being what they are, and also just the vapor forming around the rocket, it's pretty much impossible to make out the vehicle itself, and now the strong back is almost entirely obstructed as well, so not really going to get a clear view of those clamp arms opening up and the transporter erector reclining. But you can just barely make out a little bit of motion. Not so much in this view, though. Now T-minus 3 minutes, 20 seconds and counting. Coming up here at the 3-minute mark, you can see a little bit of the transporter erector moving back away now. In just a few seconds, we should be hearing the call that the Falcon 9 first stage liquid oxygen tank has finished loading.
Stage 1 last load is complete.
Good call from SpaceX. We'll now hear the second, or similar call for the second stage coming up just after, or right about the 2-minute mark. As we're waiting for that call out, I want to thank channel member Chuck Close for a very generous $25 super chat. Thank you, Chuck. And thanks to Keith Tegg joining us, the channel membership at the pad leader level. Welcome aboard, Keith. We're glad to have you with us. I want to thank Ken Harvey for gifting a membership as well. Thank you, Ken.
Stage 2 live load is complete.
With that call, the Falcon 9 is now fully loaded with 1 million pounds of propellant. And by the looks of it, that payload fairing facing the camera right now has had quite a bit of life inside of it. SpaceX doesn't often talk about how many flights its payload fairings have completed, but it looks like that one may be close to, if not one of the flight leaders. That additional venting of the ground gas closeouts as they're clearing the lines. Should be hearing the call that the Falcon 9 is in startup in just a few seconds.
Falcon 9 is in startup.
With that call, we're just waiting now for the SpaceX launch director to give their final go for launch, and we'll be ready to see this Falcon fly.
Launch directors, go for launch.
And with that call, we're going to go ahead and step back, listen to the final 30 seconds of the count, and we'll be back with you with additional commentary on the other side of liftoff.
T-minus 30 seconds. T-minus 15 seconds. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Ignition. Liftoff of the Falcon 9. Go SpaceX, go Starlink.
Stage 1 propulsion is nominal.
Vehicle is pitching downrange.
Power and telemetry nominal.
Vehicle is supersonic. Max Q.
MVAC chill.
All good call-outs and a good flight of the Falcon 9 so far. Now approaching the 2-minute mark into flight. That most recent call-out you just heard, SpaceX, as they are conditioning the Merlin vacuum engine on the Falcon 9's second stage prior to the start of its first burn. As we approach the 2-minute mark, we're coming upon those 3 events that I mentioned earlier. First stage main engine cutoff is now less than 20 seconds away. That'll be followed by stage separation and then the ignition of that Merlin vacuum engine. The payload fairings will be deployed just before the 3-minute mark. Beautiful view of North America here as the Falcon 9 continues to climb.
Main engine cut off.
Stage separation confirmed.
MVAC ignition.
Fairing separation confirmed.
Here we see those Starlink satellites now exposed to the vacuum of space for the first time on this mission. Now T plus 3 minutes, 50 seconds into flight. Coming up, the next milestone we're looking at is just after the 6-minute mark when the first stage entry burn begins. That's when 3 of the Merlin engines on the Falcon 9's first stage will reignite, beginning to slow the vehicle down dramatically. If you take a look back or at the bottom left-hand corner of your screen, you can see that the first stage booster has reached its apparent apogee at 116 kilometers in altitude. Appears to be one of the Channel Islands cruising by in the upper left-hand corner of the box with the booster. Those occasional puffs you're seeing between the hypersonic grid fins are the cold gas thrusters, helping to adjust the attitude or the positioning of the vehicle, helping to make sure it's in the right orientation prior to the start of that entry burn. Taking a look up through the inner stage on the left-hand side of your screen. It's at the top of the Falcon 9 first stage booster. We're now just about or slightly less than 30 seconds away from the entry burn beginning.
Stage 1 entry burn startup.
This burn lasts about 28 seconds in total.
Stage 1 entry burn shutdown.
With the conclusion of that entry burn, we're now looking for the start of the landing burn, set to begin at about 2+7 minutes and 50 seconds. So we're just about a minute away
Stage
from
1 FTS has saved.
that single engine burn. That call you just heard as well, the FTS being safe, that's the flight termination system, now no longer needed on this stage of the flight.
Stage 1 transonic.
Stage 2 FTS has saved.
Good call-outs from SpaceX. Now, a little less than 20 seconds away from the start of the landing burn.
Stage 1 landing burn.
Stage 2 terminal guidance.
Landing leg deploy. Stage 1 landing confirmed.
And a very nice clear view of that booster B-1075 touching down on the drone ship. Of course, I still love you.
Nominal orbit insertion.
And a good call from SpaceX for a nominal orbit insertion. At this point, the Falcon 9's upper stage enters into a coast period until about T+54 minutes and 9 seconds. There'll be a second brief burn of about 2 seconds on the upper stage engine, helping to circularize the orbit, at which point the Starlink satellites will be ready to be deployed at about T+1 hour, 1 minute, and 3 seconds post liftoff. Before I go ahead and get to the mission stats, I want to remind you that we do have a couple of Florida-based launches coming up on Monday as the schedule currently stands. We have the Starlink 12-3 mission at the painfully early hour of 3:54 a.m. Eastern. That's followed up by the launch of Maxar's 5th and 6th Worldview Legion satellites, joining the 4 that are already on orbit at the moment. That mission set to lift off at a very lovely time of the evening, about a little after 6:30 Monday night. So if all lines up and that mission stays where it is, should have a pretty nice view of that, maybe even a little bit of a jellyfish effect for those able to watch the launch in person. So now it's a good time to subscribe to the channel, click that bell icon so you turn on notifications, and you're alerted the next time we go live, which will be twice on Monday. Also, some other launches to note coming up between now and in the midst of then. Have a launch currently scheduled for the first H3 rocket from Japan. mission for JAXA, as well as hosting a payload for the U.S. Space Force's Space Systems Command. That mission coming up on Sunday. And then in between the two Falcon 9 launches here in Florida, we have Rocket Lab's first launch of the year coming up. The next batch, the 4th out of 5 planned flights for Internet of Things company Kinéis. So lots happening in orbital space flight over the next few days. You can head over to spaceflightnow.com, click on the launch schedule tab so you have the most up-to-date information on those launches, when and where they'll be happening. I want to quickly thank Cashpot for a £2 super chat. Thank you, Cashpot. Thanks to channel member I'm Lita for a $5 super chat. Good to see you this evening, Lita. It says, hello, Spaceflight Now family, Will, team, and mods. And a thanks to Pierce Mama, one of our wonderful channel members, for gifting 5 Spaceflight Now memberships. Really appreciate that generosity. And to our 5 newest channel members, welcome aboard. Glad to have you with us. Be sure to thank Pierce Mama in the live chat if you haven't already. Bringing it to a close with the mission stats that currently stand. This was the 17th liftoff and landing of the Falcon 9 booster 1075. This was the 431st Falcon 9 launch to date. Also the 14th Falcon 9 launch of the year so far. The 375th Falcon booster reflight, the launch of a booster that has flown at least once. This was the 14th orbital launch for SpaceX of the year so far, without any Falcon Heavy launches to speak of at this point. This was the 138th orbital launch for SpaceX within the last 365 days. The 111th orbital launch from Space Launch Complex 4 East for the company, and the 200th overall orbital launch from that pad as well. Moving on to some recovery stats, this good landing marked the 119th booster landing on the drone ship, of course, I Still Love You. That marks the 322nd SpaceX drone ship landing and the 403rd Falcon booster landing to date. Finally, with some industry stats, this was the 5th orbital launch from California, the 15th orbital launch from U.S. soil, the 15th from a U.S. rocket company, and the 22nd orbital launch from around the globe. So far, no problems getting to orbit so far on the year. Here's where our pie chart currently stands. The U.S. still leading the charge with those 15 launches, China with 6 on the board, and India as well. Of course, this will look different the next time you're with us, hopefully, if all goes well with the launch of the Japan-based H3 rocket lifting off on behalf of JAXA. And that'll do it for us this evening here on the East Coast. Hope you all have a wonderful rest of your Saturday. I want to thank our wonderful channel member community for helping to support this coverage. Big thanks to our moderators in the live chat, Astor Joe, Felicity Lee, Jeff Hansen, and Rick Donner. Appreciate all of you for helping out today. Big thanks to our Spaceflight Now editor, Stephen Young, for running the technical operations of the broadcast. Most importantly, though, thanks to you for wherever you've been watching from. Appreciate you being with us, and we look forward to seeing you in the very near future. For all of us here at Spaceflight Now, I'm Will Robinson Smith. Remember, be good to yourselves, be good to others, and we will see you next time, folks. Until then, bye-bye.